Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by a journalist who seems to be pretty damn loved on Twitter, Mr. Aaron Maté. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
You know, I should say I'm also hated on Twitter too, just in the interest of fairness.
All of us are, but as long as the lovers outweigh the haters, then I think it's a good ratio.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So you have quite an extensive resume. You have worked for Democracy Now, Real News Network. You're contributing to The Nation, which is kind of my dream to work for The Nation. I mean, come on. So what exactly are your passions that you like to write about the most?
Well, I actually love video, which is what Democracy Now is, and then I've also worked for Al Jazeera, and then most recently for the Real News. And I love interviewing people and getting into debates and fights, because I just think that's like a great way to discuss tough issues and to get at the truth. Not that every interview should be confrontational, but I just really enjoy it, and video is a good format for it. And and also being on the ground, you can tell a good story visually, and it's just easier to do than writing. Writing's really hard. So, but in terms of the topics, I'm just a lefty, and I'm really into foreign policy, and like everybody, I've just always been really interested in social justice, whether that's at home or abroad. And so, that's what I've been covering. At The Nation, I write about Russiagate. Not on the surface, doesn't quite fall into like a social justice, like not at least necessarily.
I think you could relate it to that, honestly.
I have been really into it, and the reason I've been into it is because, it's weird because on the one hand, it is a stupid issue. It's, to me, actually the whole issue of Russiagate is a joke. To be honest with you, I don't think its premise is this idea of a Trump-Russia conspiracy is serious. But the reason why I take it seriously and why I spend so much time on it is because I think it's incredibly dangerous for many reasons, and it's been the dominant story of the last 2 years politically in DC, when I really don't think it should be. And the reasons why I think it has been dominant have nothing to do with the actual merits of it, but because of its utility to people in power in different factions of the elite, Democratic elites who lost an election to a reality TV show host. And I think they've used Russiagate to avoid the reckoning that they should have faced after losing that election. And it also dovetails with other, I think, shady interests that aren't in the interest of a real resistance to Donald Trump. And so, that's why I've been so focused on Russiagate and trying to just cover it soberly and present an alternative to the conventional narrative that we've been getting about it, which I think has been, as we've seen, full of errors, and I think for the country and for the left, pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it is. And when people first started pushing that, pretty much the day after Hillary lost, I kept saying, oh my God, we could go to war with Russia having them done nothing. And that was terrifying.
Yeah.
Like that's scary that we could, we're making enemies for something that didn't exactly happen.
Yeah. I want to say I'm not personally scared of literal war with Russia, but that doesn't mean that there aren't serious dangers. And, the consequence of having high tensions with Russia are really serious and have, I think, negative impacts, at home and also just across the planet. And certainly tensions with Russia and a lack of cooperation with Russia, I think, increases the risk of accidents. We've come very close before, literally, to nuclear war, not deliberately, but because of some faulty equipment and some cross signals. In the early 80s, a Russian military official on his own decided not to fire after their Russian warning systems detected an incoming nuclear attack, and it was his decision not to fire back when he was actually being told to that really saved us from nuclear war. So when you have something that increases tensions, you're playing with fire because it amplifies the prospects for bad things to happen.
It does. You're so right. As far as Russiagate now, there's do you know who Jennifer Cohen is?
No, I don't think so.
She considers herself like an election integrity specialist or something. I had her on with the hopes that we would be discussing like DNC and stuff like that as well. And the entire time she talked about Russia. Entire time. So now this is
let me ask you a question. Is there a material benefit to her for no there's not. Okay, so she's just someone who's like genuinely concerned about Russian meddling.
Absolutely. Okay. She is a huge Hillary supporter.
Well, there we go. Okay. All right. So
she refuses to acknowledge any culpability.
Okay. Well, so there we go. The reason I asked is because I think Russiagate and this fear of Russia has a utility. It's not based on fact, I don't think. I mean, it is true that somebody stole Democratic Party emails. That's true. Someone did do that. We're told it was Russia by our intelligence agencies, and Robert Mueller has indicted Russian intelligence officers of that. And so if that allegation is true, like I take the allegation seriously, and I'm not in the camp where I can say for sure, some people are very convinced that it was a leak. It was somebody from the inside, and there's the theory that there's no way that the emails could have been transferred at the speed they were transferred if it was a hack, so it had to be a leak. I don't find that persuasive. Not that I dismiss it, but I don't find it persuasive. So there is a possible Russian threat, but everything else, this whole thing about Russian social media is a joke. I mean, it's literally a joke. We're freaking out about a clickbait factory that nobody would have noticed amongst all the other clickbait factories had it not been useful for a fear-mongering Russia narrative. And then there's all the stuff about Russia hacking into voting systems, which is also a lot of fiction too, and it's based on ignoring all the actual evidence that we've been given about it. So but so if someone is a diehard Hillary supporter, then I think that to me suggests why Russia's been so useful is because it helps people avoid the painful reality that their candidate failed and their candidate lost, and the consequence of that failure was Donald Trump, which is indeed a very scary thing. So blaming Russia offers us some comfort on the surface, but like any illusion or fantasy, the consequences of delusion and of believing a lie are far greater and far outweigh any comfort that it might bring us.
Absolutely. It's really difficult to try and explain to people that they're not, if you ask for proof, they're very like, it just is, they won't.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that? Because I know, because you write about it and you talk about it, I know you've got, you have to be getting, people who like honestly do not want to learn, period.
Yeah, I mean, I have to just trust in people's common sense, and also, you have to know that you're not responsible for someone else's conclusions. So you just do your best. And I see, unfortunately, the hard part is there's so much to read and get through, and it's like, and there's so many resources poured into flooding people with this narrative about this Russian threat and Russian collusion. And so people are bombarded with it, and people don't have the time, I think, to, it's like a research project to sort of piece through to sort through all the propaganda and get to the truth. Like, you'll have like 10,000 word articles with pushing innuendo about Russia and Trump, and then buried at the bottom will be a quiet one sentence being like, but Mueller has not shown any evidence to date of any actual collusion or conspiracy. So it's unfortunately, the people who've been pushing Russiagate have been, whether it's conscious or not, really disingenuous. They there's all these ways to make Russiagate and the appearance of a possible conspiracy between Trump and Russia to be just way overblown, with using suggestive language and innuendo and speculation. But when you look at what's actually there, I mean, just look at what Mueller has so far. I mean, we're 2 years in, or almost two years in with Mueller, but over 2 years with the overall investigation that he inherited, and we have no indictments to date actually alleging a conspiracy between Trump and Russia. We have Paul Manafort being indicted for financial and lobbying crimes that go back to 2005. And we can talk about why I think his case actually undermines the prospects for collusion, not substantiates them, as has been widely claimed about it. And then you have all these crimes that are committed in response to Mueller's investigation. So they're process crimes, and
Right.
when you look at what the process crimes are about, they are for telling lies, but those lies don't actually cover up anything substantial, or anything that can get us to a Trump-Russia conspiracy. And I could talk about some if you want, but it's hard to explain all that to people because people are just bombarded with innuendo to the contrary.
Yeah, and I think so much of it is the implication that we are just so stupid that we would fall for memes of Bernard in a bikini brief, like, and some of the memes, well, I never even saw them, neither did anyone else I know, but like there's one about like Jesus masturbating, and so, I mean, they're so weird, and they have nothing to do with Hillary whatsoever.
No, nothing. And so, which raises the question then, if the supposed Russian propaganda campaign is so juvenile and it was so minuscule, if you look at the actual numbers of it, then like, which is the bigger propaganda campaign? This like Russian propaganda campaign supposedly that nobody saw and that wasn't really about the election and it was really silly, or the American propaganda campaign to convince us that there was this massive Russian propaganda campaign. And to me, it's not even close. Like, we're bombarded, like people have been comparing these Russian troll farms to like and their memes and clickbait to Pearl Harbor and 9/11, and it's like, it's a stunning example of our propaganda system and how powerful it is, and how subservient, unfortunately, many of our journalists are, and certainly our politicians as well.
Right, absolutely. I think you brought up a really good point about, I think that anytime anybody gets, Mueller taps anyone for anything, it's always Russia and voting. But there are so many different entities of why they're getting called out. Like you said, it's, it's things from 2005 and what have you. Do you want to state what you brought up and said you could elaborate on?
Okay, so I mean, look, so the case of Paul Manafort, right? The case has nothing to do with any kind of conspiracy with the Russian government. The judges in both of Manafort's cases have even stated that in court. But the reason why it's portrayed as being relevant to collusion is because Manafort was indicted on tax and bank fraud charges, as well as some lobbying charges for the lobbying work he did in Ukraine. And when he was in Ukraine, he was working for a party called the Party of Regions, which is traditionally aligned with Russia. So, and also, meanwhile, Manafort also apparently owed some money to a Russian tycoon named Oleg Deripaska. So the collusion theory goes that, I mean, Manafort was brought in to run Trump's campaign, and he was the liaison to the Kremlin because he was working for a pro-Kremlin party in Ukraine. So it's all part of the puzzle. It's all part of connecting the dots. But when you look at Manafort's actual record in Ukraine, what he was doing there, he was working for President Viktor Yanukovych, who did ultimately flee to Russia, and that's where he is now. But when Manafort was there, and Manafort was there during a time of real crisis for Yanukovych, because he was very unpopular, and he was also very corrupt. There's no doubt about that. But he was facing a lot of pressure to sign a trade agreement with the European Union, and in doing that, that would kind of pull him out of Russia's orbit. And so Russia was sort of putting out offers for him to go their way and to accept a offer, like a trade agreement, like with Russia. And Yanukovych for a while was trying to play it with both sides. But the West especially made it clear that that wasn't an option. That if Yanukovych wanted trade preferences, that he needed to basically shun Russia, and so it just wasn't possible. And the reason Yanukovych had an interest in doing that is because Ukraine's a very divided country. There's people who really identify with Russia, and people who really don't identify with Russia, who are very Ukraine nationalist and who don't want anything to do with Russia. So, you know, it's a complicated situation. Anyway, the point is, Manafort, when he was there advising Yanukovych, he was pushing Yanukovych to align with the West. He designed a strategy, a public relations strategy, to promote Ukraine's ties to the West. He was heavily advising Yanukovych to move away from Russia. And ultimately, Yanukovych, after the West presented him with terms under a trade agreement that would have imposed really radical austerity and cut fuel subsidies, and basically put him in a position where his people would have had a revolt, and there's no way he could have won re-election if he accepted it. He went with the Russian offer, which was, he decided was better. And that set off the Maidan protests, and that set off the crisis in 2013-14. And it ultimately led to the U.S. helping basically oust Yanukovych fleeing to Russia. So the point there is that, you know, Manafort, when he was there, he was actually trying to align with the West. He wasn't even doing Russia's bidding. And when you watch the media and you look how it's portrayed, Manafort is portrayed as a Kremlin stooge, and it's that kind of erroneous, that kind of erroneous narrative that helps shape this overall conspiracy theory. But again, if you look at the facts, and it takes time to look at, it just doesn't support the narrative.
Hell, we're Russian stooges. I mean, if I don't get called that at least 10 times a day, I feel like I fucked up. I mean, you have to get called a Russian bot so many times for, you know. What are your theories? I got in a really long argument yesterday about this with that woman I brought up. What are your thoughts on Julian Assange?
I think he's been, look, that's a case where there were allegations against him, right? And they were serious, and they should have been dealt with seriously. He was sought for questioning by Swedish authorities, and that should have happened. Now, he offered to be questioned in the embassy. He even offered to go back to Sweden if they could guarantee that he wouldn't be extradited to the U.S., which I thought were totally reasonable proposals, and that was rejected. And I think basically, so I think, you know, in terms of Julian Assange as him being targeted, I think he's been persecuted, and what he's gone through is completely unfair. And I think, you know, I get why there's reasons that people don't like him, and they feel as if he contributed to Trump's victory by releasing those emails. And, you know, but that's what everyone thinks of, what everyone's opinion about him. I just don't think that that's material to the fact that he's been subjected to a huge injustice, confined to the embassy for so many years now. And I think he deserves our support. It doesn't mean we endorse everything that he does, but but his rights deserve our support. And I personally think he's been unfairly portrayed and unfairly blamed for Trump's victory. I don't think that those emails cost Hillary Clinton the election, and I think that, you know, he's doing his job. I mean, like WikiLeaks has a record of blowing the whistle and exposing secrets, and those are the secrets that he got, so he released them. You know, and it's easy to throw him under the bus and to sell him out, which I think a lot of people have done, and I think that's unfortunate, because I think what he stands for ultimately is something important.
It seems like it depends on the person, though, because if he was exposing things about, like, say, Trump, I think they'd be like, yes, Assange is a hero. Yeah. But since it was against the coronated queen, he effed up. The interesting thing is, nobody seems to deny them writing the emails, even the people involved themselves. They just say Russia, you know, hacked them or what have you.
Well, you know, back when they were being released, you had people like Malcolm Nance who was an MSNBC analyst, he would go on and say, "Watch out for fabrications." You know, like these emails. I mean, which was a fabrication on his part, because WikiLeaks has a really strong record of publishing authentic. In fact, it's 100% record of publishing authentic material. So, right. But yeah, now certainly no. I mean, no, and you know, those emails showed that the party leadership was biased against Bernie Sanders, and that and it showed that Hillary Clinton was corrupt and said one thing in public and then said something differently to Wall Street in private. But I mean, at least to me, I wasn't shocked by them, and I don't think they were even as damning as they're made out to be in the narrative that blames them for the election outcome. You know what I mean? Like I don't think they showed us stuff that we didn't already know. And I certainly don't think that they were so impactful that they decided an election. I don't see the evidence of that. But of course, we'll never really know.
Right. I think most of us already knew that Hillary sucked. So, I mean, we were going to vote for her anyway. The majority of us anyway.
Well, the question is, did people who didn't already believe that, did they read the emails and then decide they were not going to vote for Hillary? You know, I mean, I've never personally met anyone like that, but I'm sure they're out there. But it's a question of, is it a sizable number in the three key states to have made the difference? And the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't step foot in two of those states, Michigan and Wisconsin, in the crucial final months of the campaign, says to me that is a factor that had played a far bigger role than any stolen emails.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. I'm just kind of scanning the comments here. Somebody brought up Seth Rich. What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, his family has pushed back against the theories around Seth Rich, and I think, you know, from what I just would like to respect the family, whatever, you know, and not that I'm dismissing the theory, because I don't know for sure. Like, just because Robert Mueller alleges it, I'm not going to take it on faith. You know, we need to see the evidence that underlying his allegation that it was in fact the Russian hackers, you know, but the fact that he alleges it shows that I don't think that he made it up. So
Robert Mueller brought up Seth Rich.
Robert Mueller accused the Russian government of hacking the emails, which would mean it's
right.
Which would mean it's not Seth Rich, and so, you know,
right, gotcha.
And that's not what I'm saying is I don't think that's a reason to believe that it definitely was Russia, but I think the fact that Robert Mueller alleged it should be taken seriously, and I think, but of course, we need to see the actual evidence that it's based on, because I suspect that the indictment of the Russian military officers relied on European intelligence, because that's what some reports have indicated. And if that's the case, then I can't help but think about the fact that the case for the Iraq War also relied on European intelligence, because that's how intelligence agencies do things. They sort of farm out their work to get, you know, to other agencies, which they can then cite, but that then avoids sort of like responsibility and getting their hands dirty themselves, if the intelligence itself is faulty. But maybe the intelligence upon which Mueller's indictment is based is legit. We don't know. So I don't dismiss the possibility that it was Seth Rich, but I don't promote it, and I haven't seen anything, at least I haven't seen any evidence that makes me believe it.
Right. Somebody in the comments is asking if we will discuss Venezuela.
Okay.
What are your thoughts? I mean, it's pretty much like the topic going on right now. What are your thoughts as far as if for some reason it does seem to be kind of a divisive topic right now? What are your thoughts?
You know, there's a familiar playbook, right, where it's like, you know, in the global South, people who try to be independent and go their own way, there's, you know, they've always faced pretty much two options from the West: either outright regime change, where they, you know, come in and overthrow a government and then install a right-wing fascist, which has been the case throughout Latin America for decades with the U.S. Or if that can't be done, like in the case of Nicaragua or in Cuba, and now in Venezuela, what they do, what the U.S. and its allies do, is try to make life so miserable and so intolerable that, you know, the state collapses and then the people turn against the leader. You know, the term that one right-wing economist who helped come up with shock therapy described it as "make the economy scream." I think that was the term they were using for Argentina back in the 70s. And so that's been the playbook in Venezuela, where they tried a coup in 2002, which worked for a second, but then you know, 1 million people came out to the streets of Caracas, and the army you know, stood up for Chavez, and Chavez came back. And, you know, slowly since then, the U.S. has imposed more and more sanctions, really peaking in the last few years, including under Obama, when Obama declared Venezuela a national security threat, which was done to justify even harsher sanctions. So these sanctions have made life difficult for Venezuela. Certainly, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that Maduro is not Chavez. He's made serious mistakes. There's been way more repression. There's been serious corruption. They've mismanaged the economy with the currency controls that they've had in place for a while, and they're relying so much on oil has been, I think, a big. It's to call it a mistake, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what other options they had, but it's had bad consequences, because when the price of oil was high, they were able to fund all their social programs. But when it dropped, they had to cut back. And meanwhile, when they were funding all these social programs, they didn't save anything in their reserves, which meant they couldn't deal with the consequences of having the price of oil drop and having no money. So there's, you know, and that's not all the U.S.'s fault. But concurrent with increasing U.S. sanctions that have denied the country vital supplies, medicine, cut it off from its own resources, from its own reserves, its own oil and its own oil profits, along with a elite class in Venezuela that has pretty much conspired with this and denied goods to people, literally, and you know, a opposition that has. I mean, the opposition is there are different factions of it, but certainly there is a very strong hardcore right-wing element that has no interest in compromise and no interest in putting forth a program that can appeal to people in Venezuela. They just want to disrupt and cause enough chaos so that Maduro is finally ousted. And that's the faction that the current self-declared U.S. Installed President Juan Guaido comes from. And there's a great piece on the Gray Zone Project by Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen, all about this, about Guaido and where he comes from, and how he came up through a heavily U.S. funded regime change project, along with some really shady right-wing figures in Venezuela. And so, you know, none of this absolves Maduro of responsibility for his mistakes. But, you know, would we be talking about Venezuela today if not for the crippling sanctions and U.S.-backed destabilization? I don't think so. And so, right. You know, what's been interesting to me is, as progressives, is seeing how weak the Democratic response has been. You know, I mean, Max points out that I think only 5 Democrats have spoken up against this open. You know, it's the most brazen coup attempt I've seen in my lifetime. It's happening. You know, it's happening out in the open. So it's you know, which speaks to, I think, how far we have to go on the progressive side when it comes to issues of foreign policy.
Absolutely. Something else that's been a huge issue for like a bajillion years is Palestine and Israel. It seems like the tensions with that debate are getting even more and more profound. Also, you know, there was that amendment they were trying to push where you wouldn't be like allowed to say negative things about Israel. What is your take on that, and how do you think we can progress in that discussion?
Well, I mean, on the plus side, things have gotten a lot better. You know, I mean, I remember when, you know, it was like not too long ago, like even in the 80s, to advocate for, like, when Jesse Jackson in his presidential campaign, when he advocated a Palestinian state, that was like crazy. That was like unheard of. And, when Bill Clinton was in office, Hillary Clinton was giving an interview and she said that she supported a Palestinian state. She had to walk that back. So that was even in the, in the 90s. Yeah, that was in the 90s. So, we've progressed now where at least we can say out in the open that we support the idea of Palestinian self-determination, which is progress, I guess. I mean, it's pitiful we can call that progress, but it's progress. So things do progress. And I think you have to credit the, Palestinians in this country who have developed a real solidarity movement, especially on campuses. And, BDS has been one of their most effective campaigns. And that's why I think you're seeing this push now to criminalize it, and it's a joke. I mean, it's a joke that so many Democrats still go along with it. And it's amazing that it took Bernie Sanders to really speak out on the campaign and just recognize that Palestinians have human rights. That was like considered revolutionary. And even someone like Bernie, who I really think is a principled person with integrity, even his positions have really evolved recently. So it just speaks to how just circumscribed this whole issue has been for so long. But, things are changing. And, obviously there's still a lot of cowardice, but I'm encouraged. I think that's one issue where there's been progress. And we're now, if you want to call yourself progressive, it's pretty hard now, I think, to get away with being an apologist for Israeli violence. It's just, there was a time when I think that was like allowed, but I just don't think you can do that anymore, at least in the circles that I interact with.
Do you think that the constant donations from AIPAC kind of influences the way that, like, say, Cuomo and them, that the way they, feel about Israel and Palestine? Do you think it influences them?
Yeah, I think it's many factors, and certainly like the Israel lobby is one of them. I don't think the Israel lobby shapes White House policy, but because I think White House policy, just does what it does anyway, and having Israel as this client state in the Middle East to be an outpost of U.S. power, to do the U.S. dirty work when it can't do it. So, for example, Israel's played a huge role in arming and training death squads in Central America when the U.S. wasn't able to, and so but I do think, yes, certainly at a congressional level, I think AIPAC is very influential. That's why you see people, even like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, some really progressive, but on the question of Israel, she said some good things at first, but then she came under fire, and I think had to walk something back, is because, it's not even just money. If you go against the party line, they smear you as anti-Semitic. We're seeing that now with Jeremy Corbyn, constantly. Yeah, and so it's such they're so slimy that they just make life difficult for anybody who stands up to them. And it's also I think there's just some identification with like another white settler colonial state, that is that is smashing Arab nationalism, and has been used to suppress resistance, Arab resistance movements, both in the West Bank and Gaza, but also in Lebanon. So Israel serves a lot of the U.S. empire's goals, and I think all these factors converge. I don't want to downplay AIPAC's role, but because especially at a congressional level, it's important, and people, it raises a lot of money, but I also don't want to overstate it.
Right. That's totally fair. Let's see. One of our teammates said that BDS passed today. 23 senators against. Did you see the results of that?
I did not. No,
I didn't either.
Yeah. So wait. So a BDS censorship bill passed?
Can you guys elaborate? I just got home from work, so I didn't see that.
I'm being told that yes, it did. It did. A censorship bill passed today. Yeah.
Well, it says Bernard voted against the censorship, so that's good at least. But is there anything advantageous that can come of this whatsoever?
Well, I mean, I think votes like this highlight who is a coward and who isn't. You know, who has basic integrity, who doesn't. You know, but not as if we needed more reminders of that. But you know,
right?
yeah.
Fair enough. So as far as, I mean, I've read a lot of your different articles. What? Well, let me say this: out of who are potentially running or are have announced, who is your choice, and also who do you think has the best chance to beat Trump?
You know, look, if Elizabeth Warren ends up as the nominee, like, I'd take that personally. I think that'd be great. I mean, not that I think Elizabeth Warren's great. I think she's, you know, but I think domestically she is strong, and she is different than the centrist Democrats of the past. Now, on foreign policy, she's terrible, but you know, but I think she could be pushed. I don't think she's like a committed hawk in the same way that Hillary was, and I don't think she's as like duplicitous as Obama was. Obama said all these nice things, but ultimately he pretty much stayed the course on foreign policy with some exceptions. I think his foreign policy was way more cynical than we give him credit for. Like the Iran nuclear deal, for example. Like, we're supposed to give him credit for that, but really the reason the Iran nuclear deal happened is because the Obama administration, and there's a great book that details this called Losing an Enemy by Trita Parsi. And he points out that basically Obama, and he spoke to a lot of Obama insiders, and basically what they tried to do when they first came in is destroy Iran's economy through sanctions, you know, going back to Venezuela, as we talked about. But when they realized that that just wasn't going to work, that they weren't going to destroy Iran's economy in time before Iran would have breakout capacity, that's when they decided that they were going to make a nuclear deal with Iran. You know, so it's cynical. It wasn't because Obama wanted to actually, you know, improve, like, you know, make peace with Iran. I don't think he cared. Same thing with Cuba. You know, they calculated that they're, you know, going along with decades-old policy of trying to strangle Cuba. It wasn't going to work anymore. And also, and not that they even cared about that so much, but also doing that was really hurting the U.S. ability to dominate Latin America and the Caribbean, because people were just getting fed up with it and they were standing up to the embargo. That plus the fact that I also think that the U.S., and I don't think this angle has gotten as much attention yet, but I think it will, especially now with what's going on in Venezuela. I also think the U.S. wanted to sort of break Cuba and Venezuela apart. And I think there was a calculation that if you made a deal with Cuba, then that would make them, you know, sort of less tight with Venezuela and give Venezuela one less of an ally. And certainly now we're seeing the fact that that's literally what the Trump administration's plan is. After Venezuela, they want to go after Cuba. Like, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week laying that out, basically that Venezuela is the first step in the Trump regime's plan for Latin America. So that's the, you know, so even Obama's foreign policy accomplishments, I think, were based fundamentally on cynicism. And I actually think Elizabeth Warren, I don't know, just a hunch, I think she might even be better, or at least she might be able to be pushed in a more positive direction. In terms of who I favor,
you think she could beat Trump? I don't. I really don't.
I think she's a genuine progressive who actually speaks to on domestic issues. On domestic issues, I do.
But she takes corporate money. How?
I know. I mean, okay, fine. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say genuine progressive. I think she has some progressive policies. Like, I think her push for like, she says serious things about Wall Street. Like, she's not. I don't think she takes corporate money. She does, but she also, like, you know, her track record on Wall Street, I think, is pretty good. But then she endorsed Hillary over, who's the queen of Wall Street. Well, okay, look, if you want to get into it, first of all, she gave interviews where there's that famous interview where she told the story about what happened when she tried to talk to Hillary Clinton about Wall Street, and she dissed Hillary, and that was And then during the campaign, she did not endorse Hillary until it was over. And yeah, listen, I wish she had endorsed Bernie. I know, but you know what? Like, she's a politician. She calculated that Bernie probably had no chance, and she didn't want to alienate Hillary because She wanted to be on Hillary's good side because Hillary was going to be the president, as we all thought, and she wanted Hillary to owe her a favor, you know? So, or at least Hillary did not have a grudge against her, because the Clintons are monsters, and they will ice out anybody who undercuts them. So, listen, there was like, if I, do I wish she had endorsed Bernie? Of course, but I don't play that game that she's in, and I allow people, I think, a certain level of cynicism and calculation, because they're in that game, you know what I mean? And it's just how it has to be played. And, the fact that she didn't endorse Hillary out the gate, I thought was a statement in itself, because Hillary was the obvious favorite. Everyone thought she was going to win, but she didn't take a side, So it's like, I'm not going to, I don't know. Like, to me, there are way bigger targets in the Democratic Party than Elizabeth Warren. So if she's the nominee, I think that will be a huge improvement over anybody else in at least as long as I've been alive.
Even Bernie?
Oh, well, no, of course. I mean, as a nominee.
Oh, okay.
Of course. Listen, I would love to see Bernie run and Bernie win. Of course. I mean, although on foreign policy, I don't think actually they're all. I mean, Bernie's not that great on foreign policy either. I mean,
he's getting better, but I think he would need, for a VP, I would like him to pick someone who's like really, knowledgeable and good on it.
Yeah. And the other candidate who I think actually has something to say, and is not just, the same old sort of like milquetoast, PR sort of like of the Obama type, is Tulsi Gabbard. I think Tulsi has issues. She has to answer for some of her, really questionable positions when it comes to Modi and her comments about torture and the war on terror. But at the same time, she just kicked off her campaign with a really strong anti-interventionist message. And given the fact that so many neoliberals and neocons are attacking her, I think shows that she is someone serious with something serious to say. And I think she's going to bring something really positive to the debate stage. She'll be bringing a strong anti-interventionist position that I think will have the debate that needs to happen in this party. Do we want to be warmongers, and do we want to like derive value and meaning from being an empire? And I think she actually raises these questions in an effective way. And I'm looking for I don't endorse anybody, not that it would matter, but I'm certainly looking forward to what she's going to bring to the debate.
Yeah, I mean,
and everybody else I think is the same old, is the same old stuff. And I think they're all con artists. And I think if there's one positive legacy that Bernie has brought, is you can't get away with that as easy as you could in the old days. You can't get away with empty slogans and just saying buzzwords that don't mean anything. You actually have to have real policies, and when you don't, you're going to be held accountable.
You don't even have them on their website. Kamala and Corey don't even have policies on their websites now.
Of course not.
They don't want receipts. They don't want to be held to, like, oh shit, I said I was going to do this. I just noticed the time, and you have another interview to get to. You guys, I'm burn and turn 2020. I hear that. Miss Nina is fire. But I digress. You guys remember Teodros? He's from Guion Journal. He's freaking amazing. Go to Twitter, look him up. Aaron is actually heading on right over there like now. So thank you guys for watching. Continue to comment, and please share and follow Real Progressives. Thank you so much, Aaron. You are wicked smart, and you are so knowledgeable about not just things that go on in the United States, which we don't get to hear about a lot. So thank you so much, and good luck on your next show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.